this is our farm. My wife and I, Lisa, started this farm about 32 years ago. We're a mile and a half from Lake Superior. It's 120 acres. The 40 acres, which is what you're looking at here, along with 80 acres with a lake in the back 80. And on the farm, we've produced a lot of food for CSAs for over 20 years, farmers markets, and also for our own eating. We're an off-the-grid farm. We're 100% solar and wind power. And, you know, we've worked, this farm has been built by ourselves, but also thousands of people, literally thousands of people who've come and worked on our land over the last 33 years. We've had over 150 farm workers over the 30 years. And in that time, we've also had the opportunity to be able to design and build other farms. I designed and helped build the aquaponic farm in Silver Bay. It's now being run by a Two Harbors fellow. I designed and built and managed the Wolfridge Organic Farm. That it was designed to provide all the vegetables eventually to the 160,000 meals served at the Environmental Learning Center. Now Sarah runs that operation. And I instigated with the Organic Consumers Association, the Agroecology Center, and directed that and hired some folks. Currently, it's being managed by Stefan, and that's a permaculture site. One of the farms we started, the aquaponics, didn't have soil at all, and I didn't like that at all. I found really realized the importance of soil in doing the aquaponic situation. Wolfridge Farm had soils with pH levels as low as 3.8. That's like lemon juice. And so very, very acid soils. The Agroecology Center, before it was purchased by the Organic Consumers Association, the top foot was bulldozed into piles, all the topsoil, and was predominantly wet. So along with our farm and these farms, a lot of experience with having some very marginal soils to deal with. I left those farms to direct the Northeast Regional Sustainable Development Partnership, of which I'm doing now. So going from self-employment to university, I now have healthcare. But this program that I'll be going through with soils is all about the stuff I learned as a farmer in kind of exploring the world of soil as we had real challenges here on our farm. So the secrets of soil. Check out this beautiful picture in Nepal. Looking at soils, what I hope we can do today is just get a basic understanding of soils 101. And then second part is growing soils, taking action. And the third part is how to grow more food as a result of this process, this soil building process. So soil 101, I have to start with this poem. The soil is the great connector of lives, the source and destination of all. It is the healer and restorer and resurrector by which disease passes into health, age into youth, death into life. Without proper care for it, we have no community, because without proper care for it, we can have no life. And that's a Wendell Berry poem. And soil is the foundation of all that we know, whether it's food gathering or food production, is the base of our whole planet Earth. And so understanding and learning soil is really, really important to me as we go forward. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of soil. Soil community, I'm going to be addressing three main aspects: the physical aspects of soil, the biological, and the chemical aspects of soil. But you cannot accept just those tangible parts of soil. There's also a mystery to it, a unknown. Just with arthropods alone, there's over 200,000 different types of arthropods, most of them unnamed and unstudied. So we're going to be exploring a little bit of all this, but we're going to be using the tools of the physical, biological, chemical aspects of soil. When we look at the physical aspects, what you see is a classic chart, right? Clay, silt, sand. But really, what is your soil type? And if we were in live together, I'd be walking around and feeling your soils that you brought to class, and we'd be feeling them, and we'd be listening to them, we'd be smelling them, and see, because when we touch and feel our soil, we get an idea of what the base is. And with the clay soils, you can make a long ribbon of soil, and it'll hold together. But if you start to make a bunch and it falls apart as soon as you let go, that might be silt. But if you're moving it through your fingers and it's grinding and you feel that rough, bunchy, kind of gravelly stuff, and you put it to your ear, you can hear it like popcorn, that's sand. And so by doing various tests, you can do home tests, putting your soil in water, shaking it, and then letting it settle out. It'll settle out sand, silt, and clay. And you can get an idea of your percentages of each. This you can't do much about. This is what you get. Unless you're going to build raised beds on your soil and grow primarily in the part you added, this is what you have to work with. You're always going to have heavy clay soils, ultimately, of your soil, if it's a heavy clay. You're going to have sandy soils and a challenge with irrigation and moisture retention, but you can amend all of these soils and grow soils. So what is your physical aspect of your soil? As we look at the biological, this is the life of the soil. You've got photosynthesis, building life out of organic matter and soil and biology. So as we dive into biology a little bit, you can look, the shredders per teaspoon of soil, just less than 100. Nematodes, 10 to 20. Several yards of fungi. This is a teaspoon of soil, or 100 million or a billion of bacteria. So we're talking about a lot of things going on in our soil that we are underneath a good soil. This is not dirt. Dirt is the clay, the silt, and the sand. The soil is the life and all of this mixed together. So when we look at biologicals, we can see in this infrared, every red dot is a bacteria on these roots of plants. So these are lots of tiny things, but lots of them. Okay, that's its role. It's kind of like the base of the food chain, and it's breaking stuff down. It's part of the cycle. Now there are different branches of bacteria. There's the one we're most familiar with called bacteria, but there's archaea and eukarya. Now archaea has been found to be actually more important in many of the nitrogen cycles than we imagine. And archaea can live in anaerobic conditions. They live in the guts of cows. They are the bacteria that can live deeper in the soil. And they are also a very important bacteria for the future because they provide a whole nother chain of antibiotics that might be available for the future. But they tend to produce methanes, anaerobic methanes. Our soils, we like to grow food, aerobic. And aerobic soils are really important for the important bacteria and the important fungi in our soil because they need oxygen. The ones that don't need oxygen live in guts, live in the sea, live deep in the soil. And so these are all different types of bacteria. They're abundant, they're diverse, and they have a function as the base of this system. Anyone know what this looks like? This is a leguminous plant. How many people have picked up a leguminous plant and see the little nodules on the roots? Those nodules are what bacteria create, and they have a symbiotic relationship with the plant. The plant feeds the bacteria sugars, and the bacteria takes N, nitrogen, from the air, which plants can't use, and it converts it into nitrate, which can be used by the plant. So the plant's getting nitrogen in a form it can suck up, and the bacteria are getting the sugars to feed itself. So This is a symbiotic relationship related to leguminous plants and also alder tree, which isn't technically a legume. Fungi are really important. My wife tells me this every time. She says I'm a fungi. And these phyllobates and these systems are very important, especially in forest or permaculture sites. Still important, very important in agriculture sites growing crops. And it plays a different role, but still very important. Some are bad, and they not bad in terms of to the earth systems, but they break things down. They make our fresh vegetables go bad. But others are really important functions within our soil. The sharing of nutrients through the fungi. Fungus is myco, rhizo, root. And so these types of relationships between the fungi and plants and trees are just beginning to be realized, where huge type of communication systems through the fungi are being recognized and actually researched and quantified. These mycorrhizae, they have phyllobates. They create this hypha that will create these channels of nutrient exchange. And one of the largest organisms on the planet is a fungi. This is one type, one organism that covers 4 square miles, over 1,600 football fields, and they don't know how old it is. They think it could be as old as 8,600 years old, but between that time. So this type of exchange, this root system between trees, they found trees that are growing a big parent tree, and they'll notice that parent tree feeding the tree seedlings nutrients through this exchange of the fungi. And what's fascinating is the relative child of that parent, the actual genetic link, will be given more nutrients than another plant that's not of that parent. And so you've got this whole world going on related to fungus. We're just beginning to hit the understanding. But fungus are important, and we'll talk about this later, what I do to try and elevate fungus populations in my crop rotation. Just to move forward, we're looking at protozoa. They're breaking things apart. They're eating smaller critters. They're getting eaten. They're releasing nutrients. The nematodes killing other things, attacking plants. It's really a dangerous place if you're a small little critter in the soil. Check this out. This fungal hyphal, you see it grabbing around that tube? It's lassoed a nematode, so it can kill it and eat it. It's amazing processes going on. Arthropods, they're the shredders and the predators and the herbivores. This whole layers of species within the profile of the soil is amazing. In my research, I got to take pictures of the ones I saw in the microscope. I think this is where they made all these horror movies from. Check these guys out. Look at this. These are, that's one that's breaking things apart. All sorts of critters below the sight of our eyes that are crawling in these soils, arthropods, and they're not the smallest. They're the predators of others. And then you move on up, earthworms, soil scorpion, centipedes, snails, you've got the whole thing. Earthworms as an important indicator of soil health, also pH. And then you've got what they do. Check out that layer of soil they've worked compared to the layer above it and below it. They're really aerating the soil and mineralizing those nutrients. So there's a cycle, and it all starts with organic matter, with food. In soil per acre, you're feeding 6 to 8 cows worth of biomass every year. So imagine feeding 6 or 8 cows on an acre. That would be impossible. But the critters that live in your soil, in a good, healthy soil, have to be fed enough nutrients and material for 6 to 8 cows per acre. That's that cycle in our soil. It's so important. Let's move to chemistry because I want to get to what do we do. Soil tests are important because they tell you, I can't see chemicals. I can see what happens, but I can't see the chemicals, but we can test for it. Here at the Wolf Ridge Farm, we were looking and comparing fields, looking at organic matter. This is a nice soil test that is ultimately done by Midwest Laboratories in Omaha, up there in the corner of your screen. They do a really nice test because they also look at ratios. You can, if you get enough of these information, these ratios. So calcium magnesium ratio of 5:1 is really important. If you have too much magnesium relative to calcium, magnesium has little arms off its form. And so it gets really dense. The soil gets really hard to work. Oxygen gets hard to get in there. Calcium has bigger arms off its structure, and it makes the soil a little more loose, a little more porous. So if you have too much magnesium compared to calcium, you'll have too tight a soil. And so that ratio is important. So it's not just what you have, it's ratios. Some things inhibit other things being taken up by plants based on the ratio. So learning about the ratios within the soils is really important as you go to the next step. Building organic matter is a buffer to some of these relationships, according to many soil folks. Looking at our family one, this is 2012, having built soils for about 20 years at this point. We took soil that was less than 1% organic matter and got it up to 13 and 16% organic matter. We'll talk more about why that's important. And then all the nutrients you see here are all just full. They're just full. So ratios are really important. So this soil is filled with nutrients, high organic matter. You can grow a lot of food when you can build a soil like this. Some soils research that might be of interest to folks here is looking at soil pH and adjustment. This is the Wolf Ridge Farm, on the farm before it started. So we had a clean slate. We could get actual soil pHs and actually test it over a 3-year period. Soil tests, 6 inches down. We did 6 fields, one with lime, one with ash, one with lime and biochar, one with ash and biochar, one with a control, one with just biochar. And then we compared them, putting all those nutrients down at different recommended rates. And we looked at biological aspects to the soil profiles. Largely, this soil was dead because the pH was so low. And so we didn't find much life in the soil itself. When we went into higher pH soils and woods around it, we did. But in the soils itself, not much. And through the Minnesota Department of Ag grant, we tested this over 3 years, looking at soil tests, checking it out, and one did particularly better than all the rest. And it was the biochar and ash. And guess what? We have the North Woods around us. I make ash all the time in my firebox, and we can make charcoal or biochar when it's in soil, and we can put those two together in the right ratio. The biochar has a high CEC, cation exchange. Soils have magnetic characteristics, mostly negative, which means it's good because all the positive things like calcium and potassium can get caught. They get magnetically connected to the soil. But things like nitrogen in many of its forms and some forms of phosphorus are negatively charged. And what does negative and negative go together? They repel each other. So those are the different things as you look at your soil profile. What is your clay content? What is your soil content? What is your organic content? Because it has both negative and positive. And so how to hold on to the nutrients that's in the soil. Cation exchange, a high cation exchange means it has a great amount that it can grab. So biochar was the sponge. Biochar alone did nothing because it's the sponge. Biochar with ash did a lot and very quickly and got it up to a pH that we could grow crops within 1 year. Organic matter, before we move on to some of the ways we move this forward, organic is an important soil habitat. It's where the life, it's where really so much rich things happen. There's chemical and physical and biological stuff in other parts of the soil, but the organic matter where the engine is. It addresses all three. Organic matter is really, really, really important. As we look at organic, we need to consider carbon considerations, because as we look at all the fields in our agriculture in the United States, it's 950 million acres with 2.1 million farms. Less than 1% of our population is farming now. Soil scientists basically use the top 6.7 inches, which was the initial acre furrow slice, and it runs about 2 million pounds as a measurement. Typically, organic matter in soils was 5% or greater in virgin, unhumanized soil, or unwesternized soil, I should actually state. Undisturbed soils, 5%. Now they're at 2 to 3% throughout the country, and a lot of our agricultural lands down to 1%. But of the organic matter, 58% is the carbon portion. And why is carbon so important? Because it's a major part of life. It's part of the food. It's part of the cycle of the whole cycle of life. So as we looked at our farm, remember I said we are 0.5%? Look at an acre of 0.5%. If you do the calculations, that leaves us with 5,800 pounds of carbon on that acre. So how can we help sequester carbon, not just for the climate, but for building better soils? It's increasing organic matter. So the organic matter, we increased on 1 acre up to about 15% across the board. 58% brings in 174 pounds of carbon. 174 pounds of carbon compared to 5,800. What could that mean on a big scale? At 5% organic matter for those agriculture fields to be lifted up, we'd be looking at 159 trillion pounds of carbon sequestered. The ecosystem naturally recycles an estimated 225 billion tons of carbon each year. That's what's just going around. What's added new into the system is 5.5 billion tons per year. A lot of that new stuff could be re-sequestered in the soil. So that's something to curb the peak of carbon. But guess what? It's a win-win. Carbon in the soil is healthy and building blocks for a good soil. So doing what's good for the planet and doing what's good for the soil are the same thing. So let's talk about how do we build these soils. And I'm going to try and run through this quick so we can get to questions about this in particular. Our goals of the farm: increase organic matter, raise the pH, develop rich soil chemistry, grow more food per square foot, and increase diversity. So we had over 350 different varieties grown on our farm at a time. And that's not counting the 44 varieties of rhubarb we have, or the fruits or other things, just vegetables. So diversity is really important. We also crop rotate. Everyone says crop rotation. We have a 5-year crop rotation. Now we have a 10-year crop rotation. Rotating crops for disease, but also for soil building. So we have a legume field, a brassica field, and brassicas, guess what? They exude a chemical out of their roots that kill fungi. So what should I do after we grow our field of brassica? I want to rebuild the fungi in the soil because other things need it to grow. And so brassicas are unique. So a lot of plants have this, but it's one of the plants that emits a exude that kills fungi in the soil. So another root crops is another rotation of ours. Squash and Solanaceae family pulled together. Rotating in greenhouses, really important as well. Soils can build up with salts in greenhouses, so taking your plastic off every 4th year is important to get the rain to keep the salts from accumulating in your soils. Crop rotation, cover crops, rotations in the greenhouse is important as well. Cover crops, very important. How to incorporate cover crops into your soils. On the left, you see oats. That's a great cover crop, especially if you cut it down green. Guess what? Green cover crops create habitat for bacteria. Bacteria love lots of little chunks to grab. and they little small mouths, and he can use you. You know, they just really are able to break that down. So they increase with green cover crops tilled in. As we look at other crops, you'll see a new cover crop planted on the left. And this was a 6-foot high cover crop of buckwheat. Remember, when we first grew our first buckwheat, it grew about an inch and then died. That's how poor our soil was. Now it's growing 6 feet. I couldn't incorporate it. I didn't want to incorporate it because I wanted this field to increase in fungi. If you incorporate dead material into fungi, you will be able to increase the fungi because dead material is a more large part. It's more like the forest floor where you have leaves and stuff like that to break down, which bacteria can't really get to as well as fungi. So it builds habitat for fungi. So incorporating dead material as well as green material is depending on what you want to do with your soil biology. And I designed it around bacteria and fungi along with plant and other things. Composting, yay, someone said they wanted to learn about composting. I'm going to briefly touch on these 4 things. Thermophilic composting or hop composting, vermicomposting, soldier fly larvae composting, livestock composting. The hot composting, you need those ratio, 30-to-1, air, water, all the right things put together, mixed together to create this dynamic experience where the bacteria thrive. And different bacteria live in different times of the compost. In the early time, it's the aerobic bacteria that can live in the lower temperatures. As it moves to warmer, it moves into the archaea bacteria and other bacteria. So that each one does its own thing. Looking at the ratio, really important to get that ratio and really important to save the ingredients and then put them all together. If you add a little at the time, it's hard to get that dynamic. So have the ingredients, add it to a big pile, make it work. We've done it in Argentina at a school. Look how young I was then. They had a dog problem. So we put it in barrels and rolled them around in barrels with the school kids to try and get air into that system. Not enough air. Air is so important, but it kept the dogs, which took over the Argentina night, at bay. We went to more vermicomposting there, and in the tropics in Argentina, we visited a vermicomposting farm where they were using beds outside because it was perfect temperatures outside. Here we have to put them in greenhouses if we want to do vermicomposting all year. And they created their beds. Half a bed organic matter, the other half worms moving to the organic matter, then they harvest the half where the worms left. Very simple in the tropics, harder to do, but especially with that batch system for thermal hot systems, more possible, but vermicomposting needs them to be warm enough to function. Livestock composting, this is Pennsylvania. What is livestock composting? This is a really neat thing. It's a 3 process. He had pigs in one section, chickens in another, and he rotated them through. The pigs would dig everything up. They'd put holes in that, like we did in our fields down the roots of our trees, pour corn down the holes, and the pigs rotated all around and aerate it. And then the pigs would move to the next rotation. The chickens would come and eat all the seed that was exposed. The problem was how to get the pigs back over because they will eat chickens if they run into them. And so on this farm, they had a ramp that went from pen to pen. It ramped over the pigs down into the 3rd one, and the pigs would move on over. So this was livestock composting on a horse-powered farm that was weedless. An incredible operation in Pennsylvania. Soldier fly larva composting. Biggest challenge here is temperature. For reproduction, they need to be over about 82 degrees for reproduction. But this is something that could work because it composts everything, especially for post-consumer, like in schools. I was looking for this at Wolf Ridge. You can throw everything in there for them to compost and then take what's out left and finish it off in another way. That's food. It was part of an aquaponic project with a Hmong project that I worked on in the Twin Cities with the university years ago. But we focused our ultimate work on getting the larva and processing the food in one of the Hmong family's living room, which he set it up in. So this is another great option. But it requires certain conditions, maybe the deep winter greenhouse that Bemidji has or Finland has, or some of those technology to make it. Humanure, not allowed under organic rules. So we put all our composted human manure on indirect crops, not directly harvested food related. This is used around the world. This was human manure that I wheeled out past our interns. Each one I'd say what kind of manure it was. And they had a hard time guessing. You know, one was cow, one was horse, and one was human. And they really couldn't tell the difference in that form. Growing more food, final section. When you have good soils, you can grow more food per square inch. This is our first crop. In this is planted a second crop, and then later on a third crop will be planted into the second crop. So as we harvest the first crop, we get the second crop gets revealed. You can grow that intensely when you have good soils. This is a crop after this was 1,000 heads of lettuce, and now it's basils and tomatoes. You can see this intergrowing with the lettuce and the tomatoes. Harvest the lettuce, grow the tomatoes. In our short growing season, even in a greenhouse, we need that kind of intensity because the time is not long enough. Outside, our shortest growing season was 33 days between frost, mid-July to mid-August. So this is something we've had to do, but areas further south or can spread this timing out, which will help. We do the same thing out in the fields because we've increased our organic matter in our crop. So in closing, soils are alive. Nurture soils, organisms, avoid chemicals, artificial fertilizers, and pesticides. Because guess what? Soil organisms, worms get killed by some of that stuff. So that's one thing to consider if you're wanting to build your soil. Soils have structure, minimize tillage. The rototiller is the worst machine. Helpful for putting down crops, but I'm shifting to a flail mower, and I use rotary plow and some other things to minimize tillage. Because once you till things up and you break it up into all those small pieces, the bacteria get to work. And guess what they eat? Organic matter. And so you want a balanced system, not a boom bust system with that tillage drop. Not to mention the structural loss of the soil, which is really important for habitat for all of these things. And so soil chemistry, know the balance. Some parts of your soil you may need to introduce. Long term, you may not if you really build sustainability into the system. But some soils are lacking things. Some soils have lost things. A third of our soil is gone from this country. It's in the waterways. It's in the ocean. We have some of the historical farmland in northeast Minnesota. If you look on a map, most of the previously agriculture land, farmed land, is now average or below fertility. So we have to change the way we're growing food to also include regenerative rebuilding of the soil to build up the farm soil while we also increase production. It can be done. It is being done. So grow the soil, let the healthy plants grow in that soil, and grow healthy people. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And we have 20 minutes to entertain questions. And I don't know if anything's popped up in chat or anything. People, if you want to just ask it, jump on.
So David, if you could give a 1, 2, 3 of somebody who's starting a brand new garden on virgin soil, has no clue, what would your 1, 2, 3 be as far as steps?
In our region, I'm not going to worry about money or time or anything. The best thing would be, if it's not a heavy clay soil, is one, you want to test the soil first. What's going on? 2, in order to move it from a sod or we used pigs, and they do amazing things. One of the things they do well is they eat quackgrass roots, and A lot of times people will till in their sod and then they'll be fighting quackgrass for years and years and years. So having the pigs in first, kill the quackgrass. But you have to move them every day. 3 pigs per 12 by 12 section. If you keep them too long, then it'll pack down the soil, and that's no good for air and all the rest. That's why heavy clay soils, pigs on it, is really tough. So you wouldn't necessarily want to do that. Get them eating the roots, eating the grubs. They'll eat the earthworms too, but overall, they also leave a little deposit in the corner, and they show you the potential of that plot as you cover crop that section. Cover crop that section. Early year, put in rye, put in buckwheat in the hot part of the year, put in oats that a winter kill that you incorporate in the spring. So you get a combination of bacterial development and also fungi development. Add organic matter, add lots of stuff.
Okay, we have a question from Kelly. Can you talk more about biochar and ash?
Yeah, biochar is, when you think about charcoal, that's what biochar is, but not the stuff you burn with in most bricks, the little charcoal bricks. That's also been added. It's been added material, just regular charcoal from a fireplace. It's the anaerobically burnt wood. And so this special to make biochar, you tend to need a retort or a kiln that does a double burn system so that you burn off the methane that's produced. Because methane is many times more damaging to the climate atmosphere than carbon. So the idea is make your biochar well, or get it from someone who's made it with that double burn system, so that you can then mix it in a granular state. The rate was 200 pounds of biochar per 2,500 square feet as a starting biochar. And then what you'd add in ash depends on your pH.
Okay.
But the biochar would be a standard. That's the start. Any other
Yes, we
questions?
have a few more here. From Kira, how would you convince a farmer to use no-till, low-till methods?
Well, farmers are doing that now, and they're switching over all the time to low till and no till. One of the challenges if you're going to farm organically is typical no-till is dependent on herbicides. Herbicides put into that cycle to kill down the material so it can start fresh. In an organic thing where you're not starting fresh by killing things, there are things you can grow like big millet or big crops that then get flail mowed down over seed that's been spread that create a mulch that then things can come out. So you can create kind of that barrier. Where I've seen no-till work in organic system best is where water is in the cycle. Like on Fukuoka's farm in Japan, they have a water cycle in there that kills all sorts of types of things that otherwise might become a perennial weed. So I could see that working in our area with cranberries. So there are a lot of people working on organic no-till, and no-till non-organic is better than conventional any day because of the health to the soil. But the ultimate thing as we build sustainable soil systems is how do we do it organically, which was done before World War II by all farmers. And so, yeah, that would be my points on that.
Okay, from Alina, do you know what issues would be responsible for healthy grass growing through the season, but in the fall, the grass dies and it appears to not be deep enough in its roots to survive the winter?
Yeah, and Elaine, she worked with me on a forestry project last year. I think the timing is really important for that. And the best intensive crop rotation grazing is those really fast moving. Some are rotated 2 times a day, some are rotated every day. And so you don't get back to your site in a decent period of time, so there's full recovery. And also when there's lots of animals in a small area, there's trampling going on and you're knocking down some of the organics down into the system. That is found to actually, it's been found in deserts to build soil again and build water systems, but it's also found in our climate to build soil while also providing more food for more cows. So I think timing would be really important on that, because she's right. As you cut a crop down, the roots will die back as well, which is great in a garden because now those dead roots are creating channels in the soil. They're creating holes that the water can penetrate through. And so, but it's not good for overwintering. And a lot of our highest productive crops have reduced the root stem by reducing the stalk, because you're not using thatch for roofs or anything else. So you reduce the stalk and you get a bigger head. Not much total gain to the plant, but it's concentrated in grains or other things. With that, you lose drought resistance. So also knowing what crop to grow in your system, depending on your systems, will also accommodate the soils and the reality in which you live. But organic matter will increase. My farm with just 5% organic matter can hold a 6-inch rainstorm on 22 inches of soil in the organic matter part. So as we deal with climate change and the change in climate, which all of us experience, bigger events, more rain, organic matter is a buffer for that. Carbon in the soil is a buffer for that. So those are important things to consider as you're playing with that. But yeah, timing would be important, and maybe what type of crop is left for fall grazing or fall die down. Fall die down, I use a lot of oats because they just die by themselves, even with great root systems. And I want that to happen. And the farms that I've seen unable to produce to increase their organic matter only plow down green material. So their active part of the soil is always in motion, always working, which is fine for production, but it won't build up organic matter without the tough stuff, the dead stuff that gets added to soil. So that would be my first thing. If you can't get your organic matter any higher, try adding dead cover crop into the cycle. I think it will work. We did a lot of that, and we increased it beyond where people thought we could increase it that quickly.
Okay, we have several more questions from Sherry Rovig via Facebook. When do you work in cover crops?
And it depends what you want to be careful. And in our short season, it's harder. You want to work in that green cover crop, ideally before it's gone to seed. So the energy is in that vegetative part because you're trying to promote bacteria. When you till that down, so till it down before it goes to seed, till it down. And then remember, when I till a cover crop like that down, I will go through with blood meal. Why would I fertilize with blood meal? Because guess what? It's high in nitrogen. And guess what happens when you put all that green stuff into the soil? The bacteria start going crazy and they're sucking up the nitrogen from everything they can grab to feed them to break that stuff down. And so by adding nitrogen, now you've added the potential for planting another crop sooner into that soil, because then nitrogen will be available. Otherwise, if you plant another crop, the crops will struggle because the bacteria have it tied up in that decomposition part.
Okay. Sandy asks, instead of tilling up a new garden space that has been grass, what are your thoughts on putting a tarp down to kill everything off?
Yay. Yes, we have, our biggest thing was no plastic, no rubber. But in order to best treat the soil, I'm pretty convinced we just bought our first tarp, and we're going to tarp down our clover from last year first, and we're going to be planting sweet corn in that. So I want to get that done and out, and that's a good way to do it organically. Then we're going to move that tarp to that the buckwheat, and that'll be planted in millet later. And so we're going to rotate. We have 50 by 50 plots, 10 of them now in rotation. So yes, it can be a good part of a tighter system, and you can leave them and they last for a decade or more. So use them, reuse them, spread them around, and it's a very good way of getting that that kill down that's really important, even on cover crops. So it's another good technique, and we're adding that. We're also just purchased a flail mower so that we can take down 6-foot high buckwheat, because guess what? Tillers don't do it. They just get clogged up. So yeah, another
Okay.
possibility.
Okay, we have 3 more questions from Deb on Facebook. Tell us more about starting a worm compost. What worms are a good starter?
Yeah, red worms are the good starters. Yeah, don't just dig up whatever you have in your soil, because red worms really need high organic compost type circumstances to live and thrive. And so as you build a good compost pile, you'll see after the heat has gone away, you'll see the earthworms fill in. But after they start eating it, you'll just see the populations dwindle because there's not enough for them to eat. Remember, there's 6 to 8 cows per acre needing to be fed by all these organisms. When you concentrate that, as those nutrients, their work subsides, so do the populations. So red worms are important. And then just making sure you mix that ratio right in there, right from the start, enough bulk, enough body to the compost. Otherwise, those smaller garden ones where you turn it, where you keep mixing it, that can help. But I usually leave all my ingredients, and then I build a big 8-foot by 8-foot by 8-foot block, as square as possible, to reduce surface area, so that you get as much heat as possible. And you want the heat to kill the weed seeds. And then I leave it for the earthworms to make it even better over time after that heat comes in. And so it's usually a year process for me, and that's what works.
Okay. Andrew asks, can you talk about weeds or insects that can tell you about the soil? What are
Yeah,
indicators?
yeah. One thing I was hoping to learn from my soil research at Wolf Ridge was identifying a group of arthropods and organisms in acid soils, and then see how they change as the soils got sweeter and richer. And then we could have, instead of doing a soil test, we could have looked at the arthropods and by the species determined. The only thing I could conjure was there were very few bugs in it at all. There was very few organisms at all. That's an indicator of a soil that's tough to live in. There are probably archaeas, but the anaerobic kind and other things. So the best indicator of soil that we can see would be earthworms. Dig a soil and there are earthworms going around. There's so earthworms would be my number one easy indicator. And if you dig into your soil bed and you pull out and there's earthworm there, earthworm there, earthworm there, that looks at 2 things. It looks at how you're cultivating, how much mechanism is killing things and grinding up the soil. And it also looks at what is able to thrive there. And if you're getting big and of diversity of earthworms, and just an interesting note, earthworms would have been something I studied, like gone crazy about. Why do earthworms jump out of the ground when it rains? And you see them on the concrete on the paths, and you're like, what the heck is that about? Well, earthworms can live for days underwater. Not lots of days, but a few days. So they're not drowning. They may not like it, but one of the techniques of bringing earthworms out of the ground is pounding on the soil. And or is it air pressure? What is it? Because I had earthworms in a greenhouse and earthworms outside this was down in North Carolina. It rained. It didn't rain in the greenhouse, but earthworms jumped out, crawled out onto the paths. It's not the water. What's going on? Was it the pounding on the roof? Was it the sound? Was it the pressure? Fascinating stuff. So much to learn about earthworms. Earthworms, just a note, in our forest here in northern Minnesota, have caused a problem. Guess what? They break too much down, and the duff in the forest floor is narrowed, making it vulnerable to other environmental conditions. And not a single earthworm that you will encounter in your soils is actually homegrown American anymore.
Hmm.
European earthworm has now displaced almost every American population. Um, the colonialization of the soil, I guess it's called.
Okay, we have one more question from Sarah via Facebook. Could you give a recommendation and talk about the cost and location of getting a soil test?
Yeah, that soil test I do is about 28, 30 bucks. Midwest Laboratories in Nebraska. Google that, and ask for, the garden farm soil test. Talk to someone so you can get the right one, because there's different levels and different types of things. And I've added some aspects at times and others different to learn different parts. But the general one that I've used, I can't remember the name of it, the code, because there's a code. It's the best one. It has the micronutrients and the regular nutrients and the numbers that you can use to then I put into a chart and I get the ratios. And that's really helpful because the ratios tell you how to amend the soil with the right type of amendment that doesn't hurt one ratio, but helps other ratios. And so that's really important, especially with calcium and magnesium as you're applying other nutrients.